Good morning. I am coming at you guys today because I just got done doing an interview with Lynn Smith on HLN on her new show On the Story. And it was a really quick segment on mommy burnout versus depression. And so I want to go over some of the things that I didn't get to say that I think are really important points. And so I anticipate this video will be about 5 minutes, but it may be one of the most important 5 minutes that any of us really can spend. Because depression affects millions and millions of people in America, probably about 13 million women in America. They say about 1 in 4, 1 in 5 women will experience depression sometime in their middle age. And it's a very serious worldwide disability. So I can't make the case enough that depression and anxiety are two things that we really need to be focusing on. So here's what we kind of talked about, and here's what I want to add. First of all, I wrote Mommy Burnout. And so sometimes people have said, well, burnout sounds like depression. So let me break down how I see the difference from stress, acute stress. We all experience it. We have financial stress, we have marital stress, raising children, just not enough time in the day, right? So we all experience a lot of acute stressors. And then there goes to chronic stress. It's like, well, I always feel this way now. I don't feel the breaks so much in between the way I used to. And so all of a sudden what feels like pretty typical stress now is chronic stress. And we really are kind of like, wow, I don't feel a lot of a break. When that crosses over into the next stage, which I call burnout, what happens in burnout is 3 hallmark things. You have a reduced sense of personal accomplishment. So you don't feel like anything you do is really worth much of anything. You start feeling physically and emotionally exhausted. So no matter how many hours of sleep you get, no matter even if something kind of good happened, you just still feel this level of exhaustion, a lack of kind of being able to renew yourself. And then there is this sort of like this cynicism. So that comes along with being like, I never liked it here anyway, if it's a job setting or at home, feeling cynical, like, well, my family's never going to be that great, perfect family. So the 3 combinations of like reduced personal accomplishment, you don't feel that great, you feel pretty cynical about your situation, and you feel physically and emotionally exhausted is burnout. And then I think the next part of the continuum is depression/anxiety for at least half the people that experience depression. And depression is different. Depression causes feelings of sadness and a loss of interest in activities that you once enjoyed. So there is overlap in burnout symptoms, or when I focus on moms, I talk about mommy burnout, and then having depression. In depression, you have a lack of interest in things you used to enjoy. You have, usually you see a physical response like weight gain or weight loss. The other physical experiences you have are either insomnia, so you can't sleep, or you're oversleeping, you can't get out of bed, or a real lack of energy. So that physical exhaustion, again, is a crossover symptom. Like I said earlier, about half the people that experience depression also experience anxiety. And so not only is it difficult for you to do things that you once enjoyed and find pleasure in things that sometimes your mind tells you, I have a great family, I'm such a blessed person, I have good relationships in my life, but you can't experience the goodness, the feeling, the love. And so sometimes there's a split between how you're feeling and what you're thinking. Usually though, when you couple that with anxiety, the thoughts are pretty negative. And the thoughts are overwhelmingly just really pessimistic, and you have to fight them, which when you're feeling exhausted is really difficult to do. So as you can see, between stress, burnout, and depression, there is a lot of overlap, but there are some things that distinguish them. I think you can be burned out from being a parent, from being a caretaker, or being an employee, or the CEO of a company. I think you can be burned out, but not necessarily have depression. I also think you can experience depression and not feel burned out from certain things that you do. So it's really important because depression needs professional intervention. most of the time, I would say it's really, really important that we understand, and that was what Lynn Smith's story was about today, was let's not just all walk around saying how stressed out we are and how burned out we are and use that term lightly when actually it has really significant physiological and emotional consequences, to the point where the World Health Organization estimates that by the year 2030, depression will be not only the leading cause of global disability, because it's currently already that, but also the leading cause of, how do they put it, global economic burden. So this is a really big deal. So one of the things that I'll say, the last piece that I'll say to distinguish them are some tips for dealing with burnout and tips for dealing with depression. Tips for dealing with burnout, I'm going to say the top 3, although there are more. 1, identify your stress style. Do you fight? Do you fight? Do you fight? Do you flight? Or do you freeze? When under stress, you got to figure out if it's functioning. Is it dysfunctional what you're doing, or do you handle stress well? So number 1, what's your stress style? Number 2 is compartmentalize your stress. If things are going pretty well at home and things are really terrible at work, you've got to create boundaries, set them, and hold them so that they don't bleed over into each other, which is what we really, really see in burnout. So compartmentalize is number 2. And 3 is learn how to say no. So many people struggle with learning how to say no to the things that don't cause them joy or aren't productive or they don't have time for them in their lives. And then there's people that you need to learn how to say yes to the things that do bring you that joy and fulfillment. And that's a real struggle. So 3 tips for burnout. Again, identify your stress style. Number 2 is compartmentalize where stress comes from. And number 3 is learn how to say no and learn when to say yes. Now, 3 tips for depression. There are a lot, but I just picked the top 3. Number 1 is to create community. So you need to stay social. So many people with depression get isolated and they really push away relationships. So you want to create your community. So it's either create it, join it, or stay engaged with a community if you already have one. Number 2 is really mind your sleep. Are you experiencing insomnia? Do you need maybe help with figuring out ways to get better sleep? Are you oversleeping? Are you staying in bed way too late? You've got to have a way to figure out what the right amount of sleep is for you, because it's incredibly tied into your mood. And number 3 is movement and sunlight. We know, I don't say this in a really light or trite way, it's not go out and exercise and saying that flippantly. Actual movement is something that's really important for people who are struggling with depression, because your tendency when you're depressed is to lay down, stay still, be pretty immobile. And so we want you moving, taking in the vitamin D from the sunlight, getting out into nature. These are things that are research-based. Of course, so are meditation and yoga, and there's lots of other things, but I think people hear that a lot and they get turned off. But I'm trying to share with people what we actually really do know is helpful, and those things are helpful, as well as the top 3 that I just said to you again, which were create community, get good sleep, and get movement and sunlight, get out in nature. It's very, very helpful. It's very difficult when you're experiencing symptoms of depression. When you have done these things and maybe you don't feel like your depression is getting any better, seek professional help. We have to do that in order to stamp out the stigma that we know is plaguing America. Depression is not a sign of weakness. Depression is genetic. Depression is environmental, and it can be treated. But you need to have usually a combination of professional therapy. A lot of cognitive behavioral therapy can be very helpful. Medications are sometimes helpful or useful or necessary, and your community is very important. Thanks so much for listening about this super important topic. I'm sure I'll be talking about it more. I'll be talking about it next week at a conference here in Denver. But women, depression, and burnout is something that I'm going to keep marching on and trying to help people how to deal with. So thanks again for listening. I hope you have a great day.